Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 355. I'm the host, Kyle Lanslone. On today's show, I have Misty Winston joining me. You can follow her on Twitter at Sarcasm Stardust. She is an advocate for journalism and to free Julian Assange. Misty's been on the show in the past. She's always very informative about the Assange issue, and happy to have her back on today to talk about it. If you guys notice, my audio sounds a little bit different. The last show I had a lot of complaints about being too quiet. I did order a new mic. It's on the way, but currently I am using a backup mic that is not quite as good as the regular one, so I know it's going to sound just a little bit different than you're used to, but pretty soon the audio quality is going to be even better. If you'd like to continue to support, making improvements to the show, think about donating. We are holding our winter fund drive at the Libertarian Institute. The show is hosted through the Libertarian Institute. I'm the news editor at the Libertarian Institute. I write articles every day for the Institute, so help us keep doing what we're doing and head on over and make a donation today, and then you can also support the show just by sharing it out there to whoever you can, and by doing your CBD shopping with our sponsor Paloma Verde. The promo code PEACE, PEACE, will save you 20% off when you spend $75 or more on CBD products at Paloma Verde. And everybody, here's the interview with Misty Winston. Hey Misty, welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. How you doing today?
Hi. I'm good. It's so good to be back with you. It's been a while.
Yeah, it has, and I'm happy to have you back on. So much of the show's coverage in the past year basically has been dedicated to the war in Ukraine, and with that, I feel really upset that I haven't spent enough time covering like Middle East wars, Yemen, and the case of Julian Assange. I've tried to hit the major milestones, but things move very slow in the court systems, and we forget what's happening. But there's some big headlines going on, and it's a chance for us to talk about Assange again. And so there's this letter that came out. It's the New York Times, The Guardian, El País, and a couple other, pretty big international newspapers coming out, Misty, and saying that the U.S. government needs to drop the charges against Julian Assange. Now, that's good news, in and of itself. However, I'm guessing where I have a lot to say about, but I'll just go ahead and tee you up, let you talk about this letter, and and I guess we'll talk about like Julian's status and like what we could do for him in a little bit.
Sure, yeah, and you're right. I do have a lot to say about this. So just to give your viewers a little bit of context, so yesterday was the 12th anniversary of the release of the Cablegate Wikileaks releases, and the 5 publications that signed on to this letter of support are the 5 publishing partners of Cablegate. So like you said, it's the New York Times, The Guardian, El País, Der Spiegel, and Le Monde. And so this letter came out yesterday where they're calling for the United States government to drop the charges against Julian Assange. It's a threat to the First Amendment, all of those things, which you're right, is good. Listen, I'll start off by saying that I'm always happy when Assange gets mainstream coverage. I'm always happy when people are talking about it. It was trending on social media yesterday. That's always a good thing because it gets people interested in the case and learning more about it, and all of those things. So that's good, right? However, I think that what is missing from their letter of supposed support, they managed to include some of the smears that they've been regurgitating for the past decade plus in this letter. And there's been no accountability for that. There's been no accountability for the part of, in particular, the New York Times and especially The Guardian, and the role that they have played in propagating the propaganda against Assange, smearing him. They have had a very heavy hand in kind of formulating the public opinion on this case and on Julian Assange. And they have spent, again, especially The Guardian, has spent the past decade throwing him under the bus. They used him and his work to really establish careers and make a lot of money and win awards and all of those things. And as soon as he was no longer useful to them, they couldn't have thrown him under the bus fast enough. So there's been not even an acknowledgement. And in fact, in this article, as I mentioned, or this letter, there's a whole paragraph where they talk about how these 5 publications, I'm paraphrasing, in 2011 expressed our concerns over the behavior of Julian Assange in releasing unredacted cables. And the idea that the Guardian of all publications had the nerve to sign on to a letter that includes a paragraph like that is mind-blowingly laughable. It was not Julian Assange who released unredacted cables. It was David Lee, who published the encryption key for the redacted cables. So that then made it available to everybody. He published it in a book that he wrote about the process of working with WikiLeaks. So it wasn't Julian Assange who made those cables available. It was David Lee, who is a Guardian reporter. And the idea that they have the audacity to sign onto a letter that includes a paragraph like that without any acknowledgement of their participation in that whole fiasco is just crazy to me. There's video evidence in the Laura Poitras film of Julian Assange desperately, frantically trying to get a hold of somebody at the State Department, in particular Hillary Clinton, who was serving as Secretary of State at the time, trying to warn them about the fact that this encryption key had been published and that the leaks were then going to be, kind of a free-for-all in the unredacted form. And so it was not Julian Assange who did that. It was David Lee, who is an employee of The Guardian, and there's been no acknowledgement and there's been no apology for that.
Yeah, and that's a really important point, Misty, is that they wouldn't bring that up because that is one of the key smears against WikiLeaks and Julian Assange, right? Is we hear that he published this and he got a whole bunch of people killed because the way he did it was inauthentic. Now, or dangerous. Now, I think that in itself is false, right? Like, nobody was killed anyways.
And in fact, the United States government has admitted in court that there is not a single instance that they can account for where anybody has been harmed as a result of a leak that came from WikiLeaks.
Right. So the whole argument and the whole smear is a red herring anyway. However, the fact that it even happened was the fault of a Guardian reporter, and for them not to even acknowledge that, and again, it's, I don't know if we can say that these charges wouldn't be on Julian Assange if it wasn't for that smear and that attack against him. But that certainly is a lot of the ammunition used against WikiLeaks. They have there's all this stuff about like his character, and I don't even want to go into all that, right? But there's that portion of it. But then this is like the attack on WikiLeaks's journalistic reputation, right? They've never published an authentic document, but what they claim is that they publish too much and dangerous documents, and that's not even true.
No, and in fact, the redaction process was incredibly strenuous. Stefania Maruzzi, in her new book, which I highly recommend everybody go get, she's an Italian journalist who has been going to battle on FOIA requests, trying to get information on like the kind of behind the scenes what's happening in the Julian Assange case. But she talks, she's been a longtime partner of WikiLeaks. She has been involved in the process, and she has been subjected to the very strict redaction process and the whole thing that they go through. Like, you're not allowed, you can't, nothing on the phone, you can't talk through email. Like, they're very, very strict. And WikiLeaks is a very small operation. I mean, they don't have a lot of employees, and the fact that they had the ability to publish as much as they did, and never get it wrong, and to have nobody ever be put in harm's way as a result of one of their releases is really quite a feat. I mean, that's a really impressive fact. And so, yes, it is, and that is one of the biggest smears that's used against WikiLeaks and against Assange. And it's not just that. Like, that's a huge part of it, and I think it's the most egregious currently because that paragraph is included in this letter of so-called support, where they're talking about this release of unredacted cables that was actually the fault of The Guardian. But Caitlin Johnstone, for example, has a great thread out where she goes through and shows the multiple, I mean, listen, The Guardian's been smearing Assange for a long time in various different ways. And it's funny because yesterday was the 12-year anniversary of the release of Cablegate, so Monday. And then Sunday was the 4-year anniversary of The Guardian and Luke Harding publishing the Paul Manafort story, which, by the way, is still up on their website. For those who don't know what that is, there was the whole Julian Assange is a Russian asset and all of that stuff. And supposedly, according to Luke Harding, Paul Manafort went to visit with Julian Assange to help him with, like, Russia getting Trump elected or whatever. And in fact, Luke Harding creates like a whole outfit that Paul Manafort wore on his supposed visit to the Ecuadorian embassy to visit Julian Assange. There's no evidence whatsoever that Paul Manafort ever stepped foot inside the Ecuadorian embassy. And listen, London is one of the most surveilled cities on planet Earth. And the Ecuadorian embassy, while Julian Assange was there, was probably the most surveilled building on planet Earth. There's no video evidence of Manafort ever being there. He's never signed in as a visitor to the Ecuadorian embassy. They have very strict visitor policy. You have to sign in. None of the employees or staff at the embassy have ever said that they've seen him there. It was a completely fabricated story that was put out just months before Assange was yanked from the Ecuadorian embassy, essentially kidnapped and thrown into Belmarsh. And that story and others, affiliating him with Russia and with Trump, were used to manufacture consent for his arrest in the public opinion. And it's, there's so many of these stories where over the course of, 8-10 years that the Guardian has been an active participant in the manufacturing of consent for the treatment that Julian Assange is receiving right now. And the idea that they think that they can just throw out this, weird and weak letter of support and for people to not call for accountability for their part in what's happening is that's just not going to happen. No.
Right. So my initial reaction to this was I think this is good. And that's because if you look at it, for the past 6 years now, those of us who defend Assange have been equated with Trump supporters, pretty much blanketly. And so, the Guardian, that I think that gives you cover to support Assange without being accused of being a Republican, which is insane because if you initially, when you supported Julian Assange, you were a terrorist in support of Osama bin Laden and Barack Obama and the Democrats, and so it's flip-flop back and forth. However, from a more cynical view, what it seems like happened here, Misty, is that these outlets went along with the smearing of Julian Assange and really, killing him very slowly. But the Julian Assange who comes out of Belmarsh, even if the U.S. government reads this and Biden goes, oh, damn, calls up his attorney general and says the charges are lifted tomorrow, this is done. The man who comes out of Belmarsh isn't going to be the same man who walked into the Ecuadorian embassy. No. And WikiLeaks may never be the same organization it was at that time. Right? And so I don't want to be too negative about that because, I want Julian to have a great life, to be who he was and who he could have been. But, 10, 12, years of being trapped indoors now, including 3 years at one of the worst places on planet Earth, probably means that his health has declined. Maybe his mental abilities don't really recover to the level they should, especially with the challenges we now know he otherwise has. And so it seems like these organizations allowed the destruction of WikiLeaks to happen because they didn't actually like what WikiLeaks was doing, but then they want to now pull the plug on the prosecution because ultimately if Assange is prosecuted, that does open these organizations up to prosecution if they decide to post some kind of, dissident story and not an official press release from, the CIA or whatever. So I don't know. I'm pretty disgusted about the whole thing.
Yes, I agree with you 100%. And I mean, I don't mean to be negative or cynical about it either. Again, I'm always grateful when Assange is in the news and being talked about. That's obviously that's great for me. It's great for Assange supporters. We can use that to, get the information out there because the average American citizen, the average global citizen has no idea who Julian Assange is and what's happening to him and how it impacts their life. But yeah, it is, the timing is very suspect. It's very frustrating to me that it's taken 12 years. 12 years? I mean, this should have been, and to be fair, most of these organizations, most of these publications have in some form or another kind of very tepidly been like, oh, we shouldn't do this, it's bad for the First Amendment or whatever. But it's always seemed like kind of a face-saving thing where it's like, oh, well, we better kind of show tepid support so that we don't look like we're, in support of this guy's, like you said, it's essentially murder in slow motion. And it is the destruction of the First Amendment. Don't get it twisted. if Julian Assange is allowed to be extradited, he will be the first journalist ever charged under the Espionage Act, and that opens a door I don't think we can close. So yeah, this is bad, and so it's very frustrating to me that they think that this letter of this. I don't even know if you can call it support, because they still managed to smear him as they're supporting him, and that's what's very frustrating to me. And it's very I don't want to be cynical, but I can't help but be cynical, because I've witnessed the past 12 years and I've seen the way that this has been operating, and watching these publications just relentlessly smear this guy. Again, everybody go check out Caitlin Johnstone's thread. She gives a multitude of examples just from The Guardian alone, in where they have posted completely fabricated stories about him and smeared him. And that, let's not mince words here. That we know that the mainstream press has a huge influence on the way that the public views these things, right? And so they have played a heavy hand, like a very active role, in creating the environment in which Julian Assange is even able to be arrested out of the Ecuadorian embassy, and nobody cares, right? They created, the whole, he smears poop on the walls, and he's a rapist, and he's a hacker, and he's dirty, and he's an asshole, and all of those things that they've all helped kind of spread throughout public consciousness over the years, is exactly how we got to the point where we're at now. And so to me, it's too little too late. And if their letter of support doesn't come with an acknowledgement of their role and an apology for the role that they've played, I can't take it seriously. Again, the Paul Manafort story, still on their website. Still, right now, you can go right now and check. It's still on their website. Completely 100% fabricated. And so without accountability, I just can't take it seriously. I'll use it, we'll use it to our advantage to spread the word. And I do think that you're right. I think that this opens up the ability for people to start to support Assange without that fear of being labeled a Russian or a Trump supporter, which always makes me laugh that people thought that, or people still think that somehow Julian Assange helped Trump get elected. It's a weird way for Trump to pay him back by having him arrested and then planning to murder him. You know what I mean? That's a bad deal. Julian got a bad deal if that's the case. It's absurd, right? And before that, like you said, you were likened to a terrorist or an Obama supporter, and that's unfortunately just indicative of the tribalistic mentality where people love Julian Assange when he's releasing information that damages the other team, and then he's Satan incarnate if he releases information that damages their team. So that's really unfortunate. And I mean, hopefully you're right, and this will kind of open the door for more mainstream support. And I'll certainly take that. I don't mean to say that this is an entirely negative thing. It's not. It's always good when it's getting coverage, but we need to be realistic about who these people are and the role that they've played.
Right. And I think that if these organizations really wanted to try to make a difference here, the solution isn't to write this letter that, as you point out, is kind of waffling as far as how much it really supports Assange, but for the New York Times to actually do an in-depth investigative story about how Assange came to be falsely accused of being a Russian asset or a rapist, or to do a detailed investigative report on the UC Global spying on the Ecuadorian embassy and Julian Assange, to tell the American people, every day in their newspaper, like they do, Putin's a bad guy, say every day that, hey, Julian Assange's private conversations with his wife, with his lawyers, were spied upon by the U.S. government and the CIA. And there's none of that. And I think that's what would actually, move the needle. Now, when I go out and have a conversation with somebody who doesn't follow this as closely, and they say, oh, isn't that guy a Russian or something? I'll say, well, the New York Times said that the charges should be dropped against him. And, that does bring down some defenses. Sure. But really, you need everybody to already know that this guy isn't a Russian. And the way that happens is by the New York Times saying that's the case, unfortunately, in the U.S. And to do the kind of work that's been done over the past 10, 12 years, by the independent media, by the the Gray Zone, by all the guests that you've had on your show, by antiwar.com, and none of that is being done by the mainstream media still. So the report for Assange is very thin. Anything else on this letter, Misty?
No, I mean, I would just encourage people, like you said, to use this to your advantage. If you're in a conversation with somebody and you get one of the smears or slanders, we can now use this and say, oh, well, the New York Times supports Julian Assange and thinks the charges should be dropped. The Guardian supports Julian Assange and thinks that the charges should be dropped. I think that is a really useful tool, but also just be very aware of who these people are. And make sure that you seek to hold them accountable. Like you said, if they really supported Julian Assange, if they genuinely thought that the charges should be dropped, they should be backpedaling on every single story that they've published to smear him in the past 10 years. They should be apologizing. It should be front page every single day where they're doing their mea culpa and admitting that they've done wrong and that they have screwed this up and that all of these stories that they posted were false. That's real support if you can do that, and that's not going to happen, but as with everything in this case, you have to take what you can get and use it to whatever advantage you can find. So do that, but also don't ever forget who these people are and the role that they've played.
All right, so I want to move on and kind of where's Assange now? He's still in Belmarsh. What's the how close is he to coming to the United States? And then let's just start there, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, so unfortunately he is still in Belmarsh. He is still being held in the Guantanamo Bay of the UK. Again, and he's being held on remand. There is no charge that he's being held. He's essentially being held because the United States says so. And so it'll be 4 years on April 11th that he will have been in a supermax prison for the crime of just publishing the truth. And the case, as is usually the case, as you mentioned, the court system moves incredibly slowly. We are in yet another period of just waiting, hurry up and wait. So a couple months ago, the defense team submitted what's called the perfected grounds for appeal. They already submitted a request for appeal to the Supreme Court in the UK. It was denied, and so this is basically just a Hail Mary. They just kind of went back and kind of regalvanized their argument, and hey, we would really like for you to hear our appeal. There's no deadline for that, as far as I know. They can take as long as they want to decide, so we don't really have any set time or date when that decision could come down. And if it's denied, there are some other legal avenues. The defense team obviously doesn't speak too much about their plans. They keep that pretty close to the vest for obvious reasons. So I don't know what the plans are. If it's heard, obviously they'll just go into the appeals process again, which will drag out. If it's denied, there are some other avenues. They can go to the European Court of Human Rights, a couple different things that they can do. But he could, if they deny it and the defense team doesn't want to go through those other possible legal avenues, he could really be extradited at any moment. Frankly, I don't think that they really want to bring him to the United States. I think that may open a can of worms that they may not really want to deal with. So I think the goal, and Julian Assange himself revealed this when he released the Stratfor leaks. One of the emails that was released was a conversation of them trying to figure out how to deal with Julian Assange. And one of the ways that they discussed was, well, we'll just tie him up in legal stuff for the next 25 years, which is what they're doing. So I think that maybe they'll hear the appeal. They'll go ahead and agree to hear the appeal. This is just speculation. I don't know. I don't want to make any hard predictions, but personally, I don't think that they want to bring him to the United States. So I think that they may hear the appeal. They may drag that process out even longer. That could take another year or two. Meanwhile, as you mentioned, his health continues to deteriorate. He's had a mini stroke. He has, been deprived of sunlight and all of that stuff for over a decade. He's been subjected to psychological torture for over a decade. So every minute that he remains there is a minute too long, and it's really detrimental to him as a human being. But I really just think that the goal all along was just to use him as the warning. It really is just much bigger than just Assange. I liken him all the time he's the proverbial head on the stake outside the castle walls, right? He's just the warning to journalists and whistleblowers all across the globe that if you come for us, this is what we will do to you. And that's been very effective. I think that we've seen the quality of journalism declining over the past, 10 years or so. So that's been very effective. So I don't know what's going to happen, but all I know is that the only thing that will get him free, the only thing that will change this is mass public pressure. We're not going to be able to depend on the court systems to do the right thing, obviously. We're not going to be able to depend on politicians to actually have the courage to speak up, obviously. So it's going to take average, everyday people rising up and telling them that enough is enough, that you can't do this anymore. And I think that that's building. We've seen it building, and we've seen the support growing over the past, as in particular since he was pulled from the embassy. I think that we've seen support growing exponentially. I hope that continues. But frankly, he is running out of time. I mean, I don't want to be doom and gloom, but dude's not doing well. You know what I mean? So we need as many people to speak up and get loud about this as humanly possible.
All right, so to talk about that a little bit, you just last month put on this great rally in D.C., had a whole bunch of people out, including my colleague Dave DeCamp and my friend Eliza Blue. I really enjoyed what Eliza had to say about this, particularly because, I always come at this from a foreign policy and journalistic perspective, right? Like, we got to be able to write articles and we got to be able to expose the wars. But, she's saying that, Julian Assange and his fight is actually extremely important to the Me Too movement and the whole idea of, exposing powerful people who take advantage of their position. And, this could be covering up war crimes. It could be, contracts to weapons makers who are profiting, off of the wars they start. Or it could just be, powerful men taking advantage of the women under them. And, Liza says that we need organizations like this to, for the women to have outlets to speak up.
Yes. And that's why I love Eliza, because she gets it. I mean, I love Eliza for many reasons. And she is a absolute force of nature and a fierce advocate for human trafficking survivors. She is one herself. And that's why I was so thrilled that she agreed to speak. She doesn't do a lot of public speaking. She's not a big fan of it. But I'm so grateful to her for taking the time to travel all the way to DC and to speak at our event. It's not my event, our event, but to speak there. And everybody go, you can look online and find her speech. It was incredible. And she spoke about the fact that because the same day that we held our rally, there was the Women's March that was going on. And she opened up with, some of you might ask why myself, a human trafficking survivor, is at a Free Assange rally rather than at the Women's March. And she said, it's because I understand that if victims of trafficking, of survivors of trafficking or of sexual assault or whatever, if they don't have the ability to speak, if they don't have the ability to hold their abuser accountable, then my cause is lost. And she gets it. And I've been trying desperately over the past couple of years to reach out to people who are outside my particular political bubble and build relationships with people who I may disagree with on other things, but also trying to reach out to people like Eliza who have a different cause. But if you really think about it, what's happening to Julian Assange and what's happening to with the destruction of free speech and press freedom, that literally impacts everything, Kyle. Everything. I mean, it impacts foreign policy and national security journalism. It impacts, human trafficking survivors. It impacts if you're an environmentalist, if you're whatever you are. If you cannot speak, if you cannot have conversations, if you cannot hold government to account, if you cannot just have the truth, you can't fight for anything that you care about. And so I've really been trying to find people who are able to get how that all connects and bring them into the cause, because it really is something that everybody should be up in arms about. Everybody should be freaking out about what's happening here. Not because it's Julian Assange or whatever. It's because of the broader picture. This really does impact all of us in ways that I don't think that we can even comprehend. And if we lose, we lose so much more than just Julian Assange's life. Not that isn't worth fighting for in and of itself. But this is, and again, this really does set a precedent that I don't know how we come back from it.
No, it's a great point, and sometimes I think about just how much different things would be now, where we would be at, what wars would be going on had WikiLeaks been at its full strength over this past decade. I mean, if you look at what WikiLeaks was able to do on the margins to prevent the escalation of the war in Syria, and not necessarily WikiLeaks is doing anything other than publishing information, but the fact that that outlet was there to receive those documents and put those documents out was hugely important. But imagine, if Assange was able to operate from places other than the Ecuadorian embassy at that time, I mean, that would have been is so important. And of course, just being in a general sense of better health probably would have been good for him too, and may have made the organization function better. Also, people have pointed out that this as while I'm not saying this in any way to say people shouldn't give money to WikiLeaks, but a lot of WikiLeaks' money does go to Julian Assange's defense team, right?
Yeah.
And so that is less money that could be spent on developing more secure ways to receive documents, promoting WikiLeaks, doing traveling around the world and meeting people, receiving documents, developing all these things journalists do. WikiLeaks can't do because of these charges in the trial and everything like that. So anyways, Misty, we could start wrapping up here. I was just any final thoughts, and then what can people do? I know there's a lot of things going on with Assange. Of course, if you're in Australia, you could push, because Assange is an Australian citizen. If you're in the UK, obviously things could be done there. Most of my audience is American, but it's not like the vast majority by any means. But for us, I think it's just talking and pushing our government, but also trying to develop a consensus among the people around us that, hey, Julian Assange is a journalist and has exposed important documents. You don't have to convince everybody that he's a hero, just that he's a journalist, he exposes important documents, and that means the First Amendment protects him. And so what do you got to kind of wrap up with here, Misty?
So, I mean, again, ways that you can get involved, really just helping get the information out there and combating the misinformation that publications like The Guardian have been spreading for years. That's a big thing, because I know I'm heavily shadow banned. Most Assange supporters are heavily shadow banned. If you like this video, if you put it up, it's probably going to get shadow banned. Don't put Assange in the title. That's all I'm saying. It's that's probably the biggest hurdle that we face, is the fact that it's really difficult just to get legitimate information out to people. So, social media, I use social media as a tool all the time. It's a great way to kind of try to push information out, or to get the attention of some people who have bigger influence than I do, or any, stuff like that. So you can use social media, but even just having conversations with people in real life in your community is massive. Being able to expose them to the truth and the reality of what's happening to Julian Assange. And I've had many people tell me that, I really want to do that, but it's I'm overwhelmed. There's a lot, and I get it. This is a 12-year saga that's been going on. There's a lot of complexity. There's a lot of stuff, a lot of moving parts. But frankly, it really is, as Caitlin Johnstone has said. I contacted her once. I'm like, hey, I need a quick blurb. I need to boil this down. And she's like, Misty, it's really simple. And you just said it. Julian Assange is a journalist. He's a journalist who has a 100% record of accuracy. He's never published anything false. And he is being essentially tortured to death for exposing just the truth. And I think that most people, when you expose them to that reality, it's very easy to turn people into supporters. A lot of it sounds crazy when you start talking about the UC Global case and the fact that he was spied on and there were plots to murder him, and all of the things that have been going on. They're stealing the diaper of his baby to try to get a DNA test and all of that stuff. It sounds like a really bad spy movie, but that's real life. That's what's happening to this man. And I think most people, when they're exposed to that, are mind blown that it's happening, and it's happening in broad daylight, and that it's being allowed to continue. So helping get the information out is huge. On December 10th, it's Human Rights Day, which is International Human Rights Day, which is always fun. Can't wait for the tweets from people like Antony Blinken about how he cares so much about human rights. It's always interesting. But Assange supporters around the globe are holding events and rallies. I always recommend that people follow my friend Alex Hills, who runs the Twitter and Facebook account Candles for Assange. It's the number 4. She does an amazing job of trying to kind of collect all of the global events and tweet them out from one location. So you can always go to her page, and she'll have a running thread of all of the events happening all over the globe. You can find one near you. If you can't find one near you, be one near you. All it takes is a poster board, a Sharpie, and a sidewalk. That's it. And it really is that simple. Also, my friend Halo Benson, you can follow her on Twitter at Halo Benson. She has created, her and her team in Tulsa. They do an amazing job. They hold regular events if you're near the Tulsa area. But she put together kind of like an Assange starter kit. So it gives you some literature to kind of explain the case, some buttons, stickers, some things that you can have to kind of arm yourself if you're just getting started. So she will happily send one of those to you if you contact her on Twitter. But yeah, it really is. We just need people. We need people to get involved. We need people to get loud. I'm not a huge believer in, trying to, as I said, I don't think politicians are going to be the game changer here, but I still do it. I call the White House on a regular basis. I call the Department of Justice on a regular basis, and I ask them to drop the charges against Julian Assange. Why do I do it? Because it only takes a couple minutes. It's very easy to do. Most of the time you're going to get a voicemail. You can just leave a short recording, tell them who you are, where you're from, and why you support Julian Assange and want the charges to be dropped. It's really simple. It's very easy to do. But yeah, I mean, there are plenty of things that ways that you can get involved. If you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm constantly tweeting out stuff. I'm a prolific tweeter, so you can follow me on Twitter at Sarcasm Stardust, and I'm constantly tweeting out ways that you can get involved. I like to reach out to like big name people. I've been bothering Elon Musk a lot because he's this free speech warrior who doesn't speak for Assange. So there are definitely ways that everybody can do something, and really just helping us get information out is a huge help to the cause, because it is really difficult to get past the algorithms and the shadow banning and all of that stuff. So yeah, I mean, we just really need people to educate themselves, arm themselves with the knowledge of what's happening, and then go out there and start combating the misinformation and start exposing people to the truth of what's happening here.
All right, Misty, thank you so much for coming back to the show,
Kyle.
And for just being such a tireless advocate for Assange and journalism and the First Amendment. We'll have to do it again soon.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.